Good morning, my name is Anne Garms and I'm making this statement today in regard to the issue of metadata, which is raging in the press at the moment about whether or not the data collected is confidential or not. I noticed that the Prime Minister has made a statement that it is confidential and that the people of Australia need not be worried about the collection of their data because the envelope is not opened. In our case, the data was collected, the envelope was opened, and the information was conveyed to a third party to disadvantage us. Back in 1993, Austell found that the telephone service provided to the Tivoli Restaurant and Theatre and Roseville Restaurant was inadequate and that Telstra had misled us. At the time, we said we believed Telstra was bugging our phone conversations. Telstra denied this was occurring. They signed a statutory declaration saying that we were the only business in Fortitude Valley experiencing the problem, so therefore there was no problem. Whereas KM Smith Funeral Directors, the RSEQ, Jennings Corsetry, NEC, the Royal Brisbane Hospital, the exhibition grounds, to name a few, all had the problem of receiving incoming calls through the Fortitude Valley Exchange. The problem affected our business in a very serious way. At the time when the dispute was at its most serious, I approached the Parliament and asked for help to try and resolve the problem we were experiencing. We just couldn't get calls into our restaurant business from customers. Unbeknown to me, Telstra had been bugging our conversations at that time for 3 years. They had connected a listening device in the Valley Exchange, broadcast our calls into a room where officers sat and recorded the details of the content of the matters discussed in our conversations. And this is the critical issue about the metadata. The content was then used to prepare a secret report which Telstra marked confidential for the information of their lawyers only, and concealed it from us. That report was then given to Deloitte. Deloitte then used that information in settlement negotiations with us to disadvantage us. Deloitte also gave the information to Freehill, Hollandale and Page, or it might have been the other way around, Freehills gave it to Deloitte's, but whatever. Both Telstra's lawyers and accountants used the content of that data to allege that there was no problems with our phones. What they had done is they had intercepted our business and personal conversations for 3 years. They had listened to the content of the matters discussed. In that secret report, they had said that all calls were booking tables or seeking work, and at no time were there any calls complaining from customers about not being able to contact the Tivoli. Now, that information was conveyed to the Minister and used during settlement negotiations without our knowledge. All of the private phone calls that they listened to were also noted, but we have never received that information. What did happen after that was Austell commenced an investigation. Once they found that the service was inadequate, commenced an investigation into our matter. During that investigation, they uncovered the existence of the secret report containing the data. Some of the technical data that Telstra had said was associated with listening to our conversations was found by Austell to be false. Notwithstanding, the DPP and the AFP relied upon that false information, and the DPP said that the report did not contain details of matters discussed in conversations, and that the bugging of our phones was done for technical reasons. Both of these propositions were incorrect. They were factually incorrect. But unfortunately for me, we didn't know about this at the time. All of this information had been kept from us. The Australian Federal Police provided the brief of evidence to the Justice Minister, the Attorney General, and the Communications Minister. In that brief of evidence, it was identified that they had bugged our phone calls. They had listened to what we were talking about. They had secretly conveyed that to their lawyers without our knowledge. Furthermore, in that report, it contained evidence, critical evidence, that we needed during an arbitration, a Supreme Court appeal, and the Senate Working Party process. That information related to the sabotage of our restaurant booking lines. During that time when Telstra was bugging our phone conversations, they were also sabotaging our lines, our telephone lines. The Telstra personnel told me that was just to try and destroy me so that I couldn't continue to approach the Parliament and identify the problems in the Telstra network. They succeeded. They did destroy us. And unfortunately, the government failed to disclose that evidence to us. We therefore lost an arbitration, we lost a Supreme Court appeal. If that one piece of paper the government had in their possession had been provided to us, would have made a big difference. Telstra kept the court case going for 19 days in defence. It cost me $1,057,000. Now, one of those pieces of paper contained the AFP's interview with Telstra, where Telstra admitted they had found evidence that our telephone service was sabotaged, but they couldn't identify the culprits. Whereas the arbitrator found that there was no evidence of sabotage because of Telstra's submissions to the arbitrator. Submissions that were sworn under oath 6 months after they admitted to the police that they had found evidence that our phone lines were sabotaged. Now, the AFP provided that information together with the metadata or the content of our conversations, whatever you like to call it, to the government in July 1994. In December 94, Telstra swore under oath that there was no sabotage and that there had been no wrongdoing. I was unable to obtain that evidence because the government failed to disclose it. During the Supreme Court appeal, it was discovered through the Senate Working Party process some 6 months later that Telstra destroyed the documents relating to the sabotage. When the Senate demanded that Telstra respond to my request for the documents relating to sabotage, as did the Commonwealth Ombudsman, Telstra, a month after I lost the court case, gleefully handed to me a document destruction slip showing they had destroyed the documents while the matter was before the court. When all that information came forward, our settlement was cancelled, our independent assessment of the settlement was cancelled, and we were told by the government we could only have survival money. And that's in fact what occurred. Write down what you owe, Senator Boswell said, add on a few dollars, and that's all you can have. I cannot deliver you justice. I can only save you from the damp, dark hole of bankruptcy, was his words. And Barry O'Sullivan, who was then with Freeman's, Plummer and Pullinger in Toowoomba, the new senator, said to me, F off, go overseas, don't pay any of your creditors, and in that way, you'll increase your settlement. And he does say in the statement to my lawyers that I wasn't going to do that because all my debt was at personal levels, it was with the bank, and I was just going to make sure that everyone was paid. But worse still about the disclosure of the contents of that envelope was that Deloitte didn't stop there in using that false information that had been produced in that report by Telstra, that secret report. Deloitte, we lost the Tivoli restaurant. We had to sell the freehold and lease the business back. The problem for us was we were waiting for the government to settle the claim. Instead of settling it as promised within 6 months, it took 5 years for us to get to a survival money settlement. Unbeknown to me, 9 months before that survival money settlement, when it was being dragged out through the Senate Working Party, which was supposed to take 3 months and took something like 20 months, Deloitte's again produced a false report based on that information in that secret report. Deloitte became the administrator of the Tivoli. The man who'd bought the freehold from us was put into liquidation, and unbeknown to me, Deloitte was a conflict of interest, became the administrator. They employed Heron Todd White property valuers to do a valuation of the Tivoli. Now, Deloitte during the arbitration had said the Tivoli was not worth the money that we said it was, that Heron Todd White then had valued it at. So they contacted Heron Todd White again, and as I say, unbeknown to me, they misled Heron Todd White. They told Heron Todd White that I had removed the entire fit out of the Tivoli, so therefore Heron Todd White valued the Tivoli as an empty warehouse shell. Also involved in that scam was Warwick Power Jr. Warwick Power Jr. was the money lender to the person who had bought the Tivoli. He also was involved in providing the false information. 7 years later, I obtained this documentation through the Supreme Court. The new owner of the Tivoli, on receiving this false information, which I was unaware of, and the fabricated property valuation, issued a writ against Harry and I, based on this information. He dragged the case, he was in touch with Telstra all the time, he dragged the case out for 7 years. It cost us $865,000 to defend ourselves. In the end, he simply just gave in because there was no case. But that was the use of the metadata, the envelope that was opened. And that ended up costing us $6.75 million. All we'd worked for 35 years. That's what it cost us. And so I would say that one has to be very careful about allowing any government to intercept and identify what you are doing on a daily basis. As I say, fortunately, Kerry Heron from Heron Todd White has given us a statement, a signed witness statement, that he was lied to. That virtually the Tivoli was undervalued by $2 million. But it was worse than that. It was the false financial reports prepared by Deloitte, based on the false information in the secret report, prepared from the bugging of our telephone conversations, that caused it all. The matter at the moment is before Minister Cormann, the Finance Minister. What has happened recently is that I was unaware when the government cancelled initially in 1994 their promise of settlement within 6 months. Just to go back a bit, in November 1993, Ministers Beddle and Collins contacted me and said, now, we believe you're supporting a proposed Senate inquiry into Telstra. If you tell the senators that you withdraw your support, we guarantee your case will be settled within 6 months. A month later, Austin uncovered that secret report, and the government covertly cancelled that contractual commitment they had with me to settle the case. I then prepared another claim against the government based on negligent, unreasonable conduct in cancelling our settlement back in '94, so that settlement was cancelled, and therefore we weren't able to reinstate our home and superannuation in 1994. And in fact, when the doors were cut off the Tivoli restaurant by the new owner in 1999, we actually reduced the sleeping on the couches in the bar because we had no home. Now, had the government settled that claim in '94 as promised, we would have been able to reinstate our home and superannuation, and even though Harry had lost his mental health, we would have been able to restore our lives to some form of normality. I lodged the negligence claim, with Senator Cormann in December and January of this year. Senator Cormann referred the claim to ComCover. When I received a letter back some 4 or 5 months later from Mr. Robert Antich from the Department of Finance, he said that these matters had been previously assessed, and therefore the fact that I had said that the main cause of action was from members of Parliament, that the claim was dismissed. I then rang ComCover to find out what actually had gone on. I spoke to the team leader at ComCover, Mr. Russell Williams, who informed me he had never conducted any assessment of the claim because he had been told by the Department of Finance that I had the information prior to 1 July 1998, when ComCover was formed. Now, I did not have that information prior to 1 July 1998. I have let Senator Cormann know that fact. In fact, I have sent him a copy of the FOI release document from the Australian Federal Police in September 2000, which contained the AFP brief of evidence provided to the government some 6 years earlier. That was the first time I knew that Telstra had admitted that our telephone lines had been sabotaged and they couldn't find the culprits. It was the first time that I had a copy of that complete secret report. Had I had that information during the arbitration and the Supreme Court appeal, I would have won those cases. I needed that information. So I'm now waiting for Senator Cormann to come back to me because I have identified that both propositions are factually incorrect. Both Mr. Antich from the Department of Finance and the information provided to ComCover to prevent, once again, an independent assessment of the claim. The Howard government's cancellation of the March 1999 promise of an independent assessment of our claims and direction that would receive a survival money payment without any proper method of calculation was, under the circumstances, devastating. It was so profoundly unfair. This was the second broken promise of settlement. It occurred some weeks after the end of the Senate Working Party process concluded on 9 March 1999, when Senator Boswell was offered a promotion and a financial inducement by Prime Minister Howard to withdraw his support for the promised independent assessment of our claims, because it was said the agreed settlement process posed a risk to the government during the T2 sale due diligence process. The inducement was in the form of a political promotion to the position of Parliamentary Secretary. It also involved Senator Boswell's agreement to deliver the bad news that we would receive a survival money only payment to avoid disclosure during T2. There is no doubt the strategy worked a treat, as you can see by the share price the Howard government obtained for the T2 shares. The Age newspaper on 26th of August 2006 spelt out the position very clearly when Prime Minister Howard said, "For too long the government has had a massive conflict of interest as the owner and seller of Australia's largest telco and as the industry regulator. The government does not have to own Telstra in order to regulate it." He refused to say what would be a reasonable price for T3. That was something for the market to determine. This will be the largest share offer in Australia since T2 in 1999, when the Telstra shares fetched $7.40. The 7:30 report on 23 August 2006 also discussed Mr. Howard's promise to Australian mums and dads for them to buy shares in T3. This is what Mr. Howard had to say. "Buying into Telstra T2 as buying into T1 will be an extremely good deal for those who get involved. We would like there to be a further expansion of the shareholder base in this country. We now have the second largest percentage of shareholders, only after the United States, in the world, and it's a marvellous opportunity for more mums and dads of Australia to buy shares in this great enterprise." All of this, of course, resulted in our inability to reinstate our home and business and superannuation, as promised, for the second time in 1999. Not to mention the Australian mums and dads who invested in T3, believing the government's sales pitch. And so therefore the nightmare began. They had to admit to the Senate some 10 years later they'd spent $27 million fighting me. And they just took me through the most unbelievable legalistic process. But it all goes back to that fact that our phones were bugged, the matters discussed were not confidential. They were not kept confidential. They were conveyed to Telstra's lawyers in that secret report, together with other information about the sabotage of our lines, and it was all concealed from us by the government. And the whole time these inquiries were going on in Parliament House, where I had to go down 52 times to appear as a witness and to be part of the Senate Working Party inquiry, the documents I so desperately needed, and which had cost me really $6.75 million, were within walking distance of those Senate offices where I sat, and where the senators all tried to find out where that information was. And all along, it was in the hands of the Attorney General, the Justice Minister, and the Minister for Communications. Is it little wonder that at the end of the day, we were told you cannot have an independent assessment of your case? Write down what you owe, and that's all you can have. Add on a few dollars. And in fact, Barry O'Sullivan gave a statement to my lawyers, and I'd like to read you just a little bit of this, because I think this tells you at the end of the day, after that information from the bugging was so comprehensively concealed, this is what he said on the day that we were told we could only have survival money. He says, "No, Boswell said, line up your debts so that you can pay them off. Get yourself a house, get some dollars to live with, and that's all I can help you with. We are not dealing with any science here. Ron's idea was to try and reinstate them to some sensible order of living. Anne was instructed by Boswell that he couldn't help her achieve justice, but all he could do was keep her alive and keep her away from the dark and dampened environment of bankruptcy. I am standing in the corner like a stale bottle of piss. I'm the messenger, so when they all go off and do what they had to do and get some effing living costs, and for them to get through to retirement, I added them up. They came to a figure. I went to Telstra and said, my instructions are you can settle for this amount. There is absolutely no doubt that these people, the Endeavour Foundation, who, by the way, I had represented at my own expense for almost 10 years, they had the same problem through the Fortitude Valley Exchange. I forgot to mention them before, but I physically worked for them and paid for their costs, as they had no money. And they had 600 intellectually handicapped young people were put on the street because of this telephone problem. Their statement shows they spent $4 million trying to obtain a telephone service that worked, while those intellectually handicapped people were rendered homeless. And the government knew all about it. So it talks about the Endeavour Foundation. Next step, had this not come off, they would have just went out and thrown a rope over the tree. They were fucked and finished. That's his words. They didn't have many choices. I told them about Harry Garms sitting there, effing dribbling down his chin, about how Anne Garms cries and vomits. And it's a bit like being in the desert and you are effing dying of thirst and you have a glass in your hand. I ask you, is that reasonable conduct? Is that acceptable conduct in Australian society today? You know, this is a very serious issue. This metadata issue is a very serious issue. I'm sure the government can find a way to protect people's information, but a lot more has to be done if the evidence I have that shows how we were treated when, in fact, the envelope was opened, I think that then the government has to really consider very carefully. Just in closing, I'd like to say I became an enemy of the state. Terrible things have been said about me. They've tried to discredit me in any way possible because I put up a good fight. I wasn't going to lay down and see my family destroyed. And in fact, back in September 2005, Senator Barnaby Joyce phoned me and said, I did a deal today. And I said, what was that? He said, I've done a deal. I gave my vote for the sale of Telstra on the understanding that you would have an independent assessment of your claim. That deal was again reneged on. Barnaby wrote many letters saying, you promised a loss assessment. The government changed the deal. 5 years after that, in 2010, I obtained a minute through the Australian Appeals Tribunal. I obtained some documents. I obtained a minute from the Department of Communications, and that minute said, on the 16th of November 2005, 2 months after Barnaby did the deal, that there were risks to the government by this independent assessment process, that the assessor may award substantial amounts of compensation and that could affect Telstra's financial viability. Now, I ask you, this is for real, and I have those documents. I just ask the Prime Minister and Minister Cormann and the Attorney General, George Brandis, who recently I have been in communication with, and he can't answer the question that my question to him about where in the Act does it allow Telstra to intercept your conversations, listen to the matters discussed, and then convey that information to their lawyers secretly. Where is that? His Chief of Staff, Mr. Paul O'Sullivan, has come back and said that under certain circumstances they can. They can only do that with a warrant of the court, and there's never ever been any warrant issued to allow anyone to listen to my conversations. I wrote back to George Brandis and I said, my matters are not complex. The evidence is clear on the face of the documents I have before me of what happened. The complexity arises from the plot developed by the Keating government in 1994 to try and conceal these matters, a plot that has continued. In fact, I said to him that I think the plot developed by the government makes the bank job looks like a teddy bear's picnic. Thank you for listening to this, and I just hope that Prime Minister Abbott takes heed, and I'm sure he's a sensible man. I'm sure that he will make sure that the metadata, the envelope is kept closed, but I'm not convinced about that. Thank you.